Okay, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. This is the final part, I'm sad to say, of the Black Country Study Centre and ArtsFest Online series of public lectures marking the 70th anniversary of the Festival of Britain here in the Black Country. So this evening we have the pleasure of being joined by artist and lecturer Sian Mcfarlane. Sian works with photography, film and installation. Archival research is central to her practice. She also teaches on the BA photography course at Coventry University. And at the moment she's working on a project with students, partner artists and schools where they will co-create works during the autumn term based on community and place as part of the Coventry City of Culture. Sian also holds a studio at Asylum Studios in Wolverhampton, and great to hear that just last week she found out she has Arts Council funding to research the work of Oscar Raylander, a Victorian studio photographer, and his relationships to the city of Wolverhampton. And she'll be doing lots of kind of archival research into Oscar Raylander and create studio work based on that research. And this is all linked to the British Art Show 9, which will be taking place in Wolverhampton next year. Quickly, before I hand over to Sian, just a quick bit of housekeeping. There will be time for some Q&A and discussion at the end, and it's lovely to see that people have been saying hello and introducing themselves in the chat as well. Please note that the session is being recorded, so please don't disclose any kind of personal information in those chats there. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to kind of post those using the Q&A box at the bottom or through the chat. As I mentioned as well, this is the final part of the Festival of Britain event. Season of events, and it's great to have Sian with us here tonight. It was based on research conducted at the museum that then led to conversations with various academics at the university that kind of led to the creation of this season. It's been wonderful to see the response to that, and it was also wonderful for me, and I know for others, to come across Sian's work as well. And what makes it really exciting is Sian's not only been doing the research into this subject, but also creating some really quite beautiful work inspired by it. So it's a great pleasure for me to hand over to artist and lecturer Sian Mcfarlane. Thank you.
Hello everybody, thank you so much Jenny, and thanks to everyone for inviting me as part of this series of talks. I was really pleased to be invited. And as Jenny mentions, I carried out this research a few years ago now, actually, in the making of work. So I don't sort of claim expertise necessarily in all aspects of this research, but what's really interesting is how it can be used for me as a stepping off point and a way to kind of inform the making of new photographic or video work, and you know, that's always really interesting to me, kind of unearthing kind of strands of history through archival research, but also through talking to people and through doing sort of oral gathering of research, oral history, sort of carrying out kind of both looking at the past and looking at the present, as it were. So I hope to kind of talk a little bit around that today as well. But I've got a series of slides which hopefully illustrate this process and illustrate the research. So I'll just start to share those now. Hopefully you can all see that. So this research started way back in 2014. I just completed an MA in photography, and as part of that I'd made some work which was heavily involved in research in Aberystwyth at the archives there. I just saw that someone's from Aberystwyth, so hello to you. And I kind of got really interested in that way of working. So I made this piece of work based in North Wales, which looked at an archive of a painter who had strong links there, who originally came from Manchester. Waite is his name, and his daughter, Lily Waite, became this central person within that work. So in developing that way of working, in looking at research and finding out information through archival research as a stepping off point to make photographic work and video work, I increasingly got interested in that approach, and so brought that approach back. I'm a Wolverhampton based artist, back to kind of working here, and was looking around and attending and going to archives, looking for, you know, kind of interesting stepping off points. And that took me to the Walsall Local History Centre. I've got lots of links with Walsall, you know, it's just down the road from Wolverhampton, and I've worked there for many years in schools delivering photography and film projects with young people, particularly in the areas of sort of Bloxwich and Sheffield. So I was quite well versed in Walsall and interested in you know, kind of its rich history. Brought me here, and I was very loosely looking through particularly the photographic work there, without particularly knowing what I was looking for, but just sort of thinking about what, you know, what drew my eye and what kind of inspiration, where, you know, if any inspiration lay there. And what I was particularly drawn to and started to become interested in were a series of images that I found, black and white images of the fairs, of the celebrations that occurred within Walsall and its surrounding areas. It wasn't Walsall specific, I must add. So this particular image drew me in, you know, of the carnival queens, and this came from Winnall Carnival from the 50s. And you know, I just got really interested in these really rich images of this kind of leisure life, of this celebratory life of the area, and you know, started to look further at these, started to be really drawn and actually deliberately look for these sorts of images of people at play or in celebration, and found many, and particularly of women in their role as carnival queens and their attendants of young women and of children, and was really drawn to that kind of that use of costume and of celebration and bringing together of a community that can be seen in a lot of these images, and worked, you know, got lots of help. I think archives are full of people that know so much about what's there and talking, and there's you know, there's a lot that can be done on your own in terms of going through the catalogues, etc. But I think the best thing to do really is to kind of talk to the people of the archives, and a lady there called Libby was really instrumental in this, you know, sort of thought, you know, I had, you know, chat to her quite informally, and she'd say, oh, you're interested in this, why, you know, why don't you look at this? And so, you know, it became this kind of quite organic process of looking at this sort of history of leisure life within the surrounding areas of Walsall and within the Walsall Centre itself. And so these are just, I pulled in today just as a starting point really, some of these as an example of where this work started. So here's a Walsall Carnival image, quite an early one from the 20s, which I thought was really evocative. And it kind of, you know, there's this real rich scene that actually is still around. And I'm sure those people from Walsall that are here, I think there's a few of you, which is great to see, will know that, you know, obviously COVID has hit and there are challenges in the present day with a lot of these celebrations, but they're still going on. And so I was really keen to kind of use that research into the present day and to look at what continued into the more recent history of these areas of Carma, Bloxwich, Walsall, but also, you know, kind of, you know, look at the history and look at what strands continue. Talking to the people at the archive, talking around what I'd started to become quite interested in, there were other strands that were pulled in that I just briefly mentioned. So there was this strand of kind of theatre, of, you know, Walsall, I suppose, wasn't particularly unusual in that it had a really rich, you know, kind of nightlife and life of theatre, of performance, of kind of leisure, as was the case, you know, pre sort of TV and cinema in lots of parts of the country. But I sort of started to look at that, and so images of theatres got pulled into the research. Theatres that oftentimes might become cinemas, or might be used, you know, if the building survived, you know, it often, you know, you'd go theatre, cinema, perhaps bingo hall or discotheque, Wetherspoons. So you'd find these themes of kind of the use of buildings within the centre, but also in the surrounding locales, and these kind of histories there. And, you know, I'm not the first to look at this work and look at this history. And so I drew on, you know, there was a really great oral history within the museum, which was still open at the time. Walsall Museum, unfortunately, now it's not open any longer, but it was above the library. And they had some oral histories there of people remembering going to the cinema. So, you know, I spent about 18 months in total, I think, at least, in this research of kind of drawing these different layers together, drawing these different elements of history together. In a quite an open-ended way, in sort of talking to people and looking at the archives and what was there. So, you know, things like the Her Majesty's Theatre site, which was in Walsall Town Centre, is now, which became the Savoy Cinema, is now a sort of a Poundland and a pure gym. And you can almost see, which I liked and I thought was interesting, the kind of the resonance of that image in the present day. I don't know if it's deliberate or not, and there's probably people that are more expert than me that can tell us more about that, but these are the things that really interested me in the research, locating it in the present day. So that was the next step, really, was looking at these instances and these images in the archive, talking to the archivists and the people within the archive about them and where they'd be located, and going and finding those places in the present day of what was 2014, 2015. And as I mentioned, you know, sometimes they'd still exist and sometimes not. And sometimes they'd be a Wetherspoons, often as not, particularly, you know, might have gone from cinema to Wetherspoons. And so this work kind of got developed into a relationship with the new Art Gallery Walsall, who were really instrumental in it. And it developed into a residency. And I worked with them for possibly a lot longer than we'd all initially thought would happen on the project, because it became this really rich project of lots and lots of research, lots and lots of talking to people. And Hannah Anderson and Deb Robinson and various curators and staff at the gallery were really, really instrumental and supportive in that, you know, kind of in practical ways, in kind of finding out where things were and are, in terms of locating objects and locating places to go and look. So another rich strand was the Walsall Illuminations, which, you know, as many people from Walsall know and surrounding areas, was, you know, a real highlight of the year, and no longer happens, but has happened up until comparatively recently. And some of the images came from that. And part of the research was to kind of find out where those illuminations were and if we could locate them, which was a very long process, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But yeah, so just to kind of round off this series of images, you know, the bingo hall, which was created, which became, the Imperial, the Wetherspoons pub, and you know, these places became part of the film, which hopefully I'll show you an excerpt of after I've talked about more of the research, you know, and it sort of locating some of the research in the present day places became a really, really key process within the project. So, you know, I'd film and photograph the places now and locate the older images and the the archival research within those spaces and places. Just to add, another kind of key part, as I mentioned, was cinemas. And fairs actually was another really key area. Pat Collins became a really integral and important part of the project. But we did manage to locate, it wasn't quite Walsall, but it was on the way to Birmingham from Walsall. And I did work, just to mention, we'd work with students from Walsall College who were incredibly important in the project. And one of the students sort of passed this on his bus route and said, well, something's happening at the former site of the Clifton, which was a huge building. And so we managed to get access, and it was being turned, I think, into a banquet hall at the time. So we tried, and Hannah and I at the gallery kind of tried to go through lots of ways of contacting people, finding out who the owner was, not getting anywhere until one day I sort of walked up and said, can I come in? I'm really interested. I'm making a project about cinemas and the leisure life and history of the location, and they said yeah. So I went in and filmed, and upstairs in the Clifton, right at the top, there was the old projection booth, which was was in this, it was very kind of run down and probably in the process of becoming part of the banqueting hall, but the downstairs had been completely sort of renovated beautifully and using these big spaces. So that was that was nice to kind of find these little pockets and work out what had happened where, and talking to local residents as well. So I talked to people and gathered their remembrances and kind of histories of going to the cinema or of going to the Warsaw Illuminations when they were a kid, say. So another element of the project was, as I just mentioned, like kind of locating some of these artefacts linked to the history of Walsall's leisure life, and wanting to find things like the Illuminations, which would have been part of the Illuminations at the Walsall Arboretum. And it took a lot of detective work to eventually find them in Darlaston, in the storage site of the museum, which was a great place to visit. And I went with some students, and we kind of had a day of looking around and looking at lots of interesting artifacts, and eventually found some of the Walsall Illuminations, and one of them became part of the exhibition. We chose the peacock to kind of and the team at the gallery helped in this to kind of dust it off. It'd been sat there for how many years, I don't know, and kind of bring it back to illumination, as it were, by and I think it was pretty good shape, but it had just been sat in the storage for a while, so to kind of make sure everything was working electronically and install it in the gallery was a real highlight of the project, and really exciting to have that aspect. And in Darlaston, and actually I remember we went to another location associated with the museum, might have been at the museum itself if memory serves, where there was sort of artifacts kept. And these top left image, these glass containers would have been in the Walsall Arboretum as part of the Illuminations way back when, and lit with candles. And then there were things like the cinema seats you can see on the right of the image, and sort of cinema stub ticket, stubs of the tickets. So all these elements were really interesting to kind of look at, and to get a sense of the history of this life of visiting cinemas, of going to the fair, of going to Walsall Illuminations. I talked to lots of people in this process, and lots of curators and others had done some of the heavy legwork previous to this. And I remember talking to a chap called Carl Franklin, who'd curated an exhibition around the theatre and cinema life, and I think it was curated in the 90s, so it was sort of 20 years previous. And I managed to get in touch with him about his memories of doing that, of gathering all this ephemera and information together. And it was really interesting to actually hear him talk about when the site of, I think it was Her Majesty's, although I might be wrong, was actually being ripped out. And he, you know, at the time, he sort of, in a similar way to we did with the Clifton, he, you know, popping his head in and having a look and managing to save certain aspects of the cinema space, what would have been a theatre, and install them in the museum and in the, you know, kind of keep them, but then missing out on like posters that had been collected, and then one of the builders saw them one day and then they were gone the next. So it's almost like, you know, this kind of interesting capturing of all this material, and whether or not it can be captured is quite haphazard, but there's a richness to it, and then you can find these really interesting elements within that. So I found, you know, it incredibly interesting to talk to a range of people and to gather all this information together. And as I mentioned, and I'll just briefly mention this, going to Pat Collins Fair, which is still active. So tracking down where Pat Collins Fair was next going to be, and going and photographing and filming at the fair and talking to people, and that being a part of the film. And so, you know, this research fed into my own work and my own creation of work at places like Walsall Arboretum, and talking to people like a kind of carnival queen, block switch carnival queen, Tammy Scale, who, you know, I talked to her several years after she'd been the carnival queen one year, but she had this rich kind of archive of her own of the images of being the carnival queen. So, you know, elements of what I made for the exhibition were all of these aspects. So an aspect of it, you know, part of this, I made a film and a series, and there was installation aspects to the way that it was in the space. So there was the illumination, and then there was other artifacts, and so there's a 40-minute film, and a part of the film was Tammy's experience of being the carnival queen and of the floats, that being a direct link to those images that started me on this journey of making this work, which were from the floats and from the carnival queens of many years previous, and, you know, kind of and wanting to kind of make those links between the historical and the more contemporary, or the present day, and, you know, with the best will in the world, there's, you know, if I had more time and abilities to sort of do everything, I would have wanted to do that some more, in fact, in terms of getting to more of the present day carnivals, but it was never quite possible to do that, to do everything. But I know at the time, I think Pelsall Carnival was happening. So, you know, kind of, and it's something I still want to do, really, even to this day. This work was 6 years ago, is to kind of continue that, you know, and going to those present day celebrations. That was a long preamble to get to the main, kind of one of the main aspects of this project, which was in the research. I found a script, which and what's great, you know, with a lot of archives now, is that there's lots of stuff online. You know, you know, to an extent, it's, you know, the best thing to do is to be in the building of the archive, but you can find out a lot from doing online searches, and it's there. So I just pulled this up recently this week, and you can see it's an entry on the Black Country History website, which is a great resource. And it's the Pageant of Walsall to celebrate the Festival of Britain 1951, staged at the Town Hall, 8th to the 13th of October 1951. And that really, you know, really interested me as a sort of, you know, in all of that, the things that I've been talking about, the history of celebration and the history of kind of leisure life, of bringing people together, of community, of group celebration, kind of, you know, this piqued my interest. It seemed to kind of have all of those elements. And so I looked at it, and I, you know, and I kind of you know, got involved in what this was, and this became a really central part of the project. So it's I think there might be two in the archive from memory, although that I might, this is sort of 6 years memory here, some of these elements, and I'm a little bit rusty on some of the details, but I remember getting it out, and I remember looking through, and it's a really big thing. It's 110 pages, I want to say, and I managed to find my copy of it, actually, because I got a version of it for what I did next, which I'm about to tell you. So got a photocopy or two. So I've kept this from 6 years ago, and so have been looking through it recently to remind myself really of this and what we did with it. And it's a series of tableau. So, and it's, as I mentioned, it's really long. So I don't know how long the performance would have been. Oh, it's 115 pages long, but a considerable performance. Using a huge cast, it would have been, because some of them call for crowd scenes of 30 people. So some of the tableau have a couple of people in them, and some have many more. So it was a huge undertaking, and there are tableau really from the inception of Walsall right through to kind of present day, as it were, of the time. So it comes from, the very first one is AD 1916, Ethelfreda, Princess of Mercia, and the kind of formation and foundation of Walsall. And that's, the very first tableau, and it goes through, I think I might have a list here. So this was it in installation, in kind of presentation, as part of the exhibition, the image that you see at the minute. And so as part of the residency, I had a kind of interim display of research, which then led to the full installation of the body of work in 2015. So it's quite a long project, this. But here's the tableau list. So it goes from the foundation of Walsall through tableau 2, which was Margaret Paynell, and then some of the tableau I kind of concentrated on more than others, because it's a huge thing. Tableau 3, Code of Laws, tableau 4, Bayard and his Colts, which will be familiar to everyone from Walsall. Tableau 5, the Town Charter, tableau 6, the Escape of Charles II, tableau 7, Wesley, and that's the one I think that used big crowds, and Deputation of the Prince of Wales, tableau 8, tableau 9, Thomas Askin's Ventriloquist. So some of them were a little bit more kind of tongue-in-cheek, as it were, or funnier, I guess. And then tableau 10 is a famous daughter of Walsall, Sister Dora, and tableau 11, Sequel, who was a kind of quack. So I kind of looked at some of them as a sort of focus for the work that I then made for the exhibition. And what I did was reach out to, and I was working with Walsall College students who were art and photography students, who were really instrumental in the sort of making of the work. And then I reached out to drama students to work with me on restaging some of these aspects, some of these elements. So not to even perhaps do a whole tableau, because it's 115 pages. It's substantial. And it's a big thing, but to pick out elements and to kind of restage them in the place that it was originally staged, which was the town hall. So with the big help of Hannah and co at the gallery, we got access to the town hall, which was no mean feat, really. Actually, it was quite tricky to do, for a day of filming. I reached out to lots of different people, and it was to do with availability and kind of ability to, all the logistics of people being able to take part and to contribute to the work. But found a group of students who were kind of really stepped up and worked with me for that day. Group of 4 students who became quite central to the film, and we restaged it quite, I suppose, not a perfect word, but a word that springs to mind is naturalistically, in terms of, without costumes, without I think it would be an impossibility to learn all those lines, but without trying to kind of cover up the artifice of it and cover up the kind of the back, the kind of behind the backdrop, as it were, or behind the scenes. And that's part of the film, really. Sometimes you hear the kind of preparation, or you hear me say cut. It's sort of, it's about the restaging is it as much as it is about content. So we worked on this for a day of naturalistically doing it, but staging it. And hopefully, I thought, and they were fantastic performers, I've got to say, in an interesting way, using the spaces and the stage of the town hall, which was this amazing venue. It's really, had this wow factor. So we worked on that, and I think we did Tableau 2. This will test me now. We did Tableau 2, and then we did the Bayard Colts Tableau, which was Tableau 4, I think, and then a later Tableau. And there was a nice moment in the script where there are narrators throughout. So there's a narrator that's kind of comes in between Tableau in this massive script, and so we did this excerpt, which was later on in the play, which kind of summarizes a lot of what's gone on, and talks about who we've seen and who we're going to see. So we restaged that element, and restaged different aspects in this kind of slightly informal way. I also worked with some students at one of the schools that I had a really good relationship with, that I'd worked with for many years, Ormston Sheffield Academy. And so I worked with some slightly younger students, some drama students there. And from memory, I think we restaged Sister Dora in the space of the town hall as well. So, it was sort of logistically challenging, but quite interesting. I'd never done anything like this before on this scale, in terms of kind of taking an existing text and restaging it in these ways. And I found it to be, it kind of, there were some moments that I think were quite powerful in the restaging, and it was interesting that still was there, even though we didn't have the costumes and the artifice of it in a way that they would have had in the original staging. And this is one of the key performers, and she was quite central really to it. I will play some of the film in a moment, so you can get a sense of it. Forgive me if the quality of the playback isn't perfect, sort of working with bandwidth and the internet, etc., playing from my computer off to you, but we'll try our best on that. But just to say before I do that, this work was exhibited in the gallery on the 4th floor. It became the work We Are Illuminated. You can see in this image there was some kind of vitrines and trestle tables as you sort of came into the space, where a lot of the research sat. So there was research there from the Arboretum, from the carnivals and the cinemas, some of the images from the archive, Tammy's photo books of her time as Carnival Queen were there. So people lent us this stuff, and these kind of precious archival elements, which then went back to them after the exhibition. And then you can see next to the text, as you walk into the space, there are the glass objects from the Arboretum, and then the script is there as you kind of enter the space. So it's in this vitrine under glass, and of course we had to talk to the local history centre for permission to use it, and they're really work with us really in really generous ways with all of these elements of loaning, borrowing elements, and using them as part of the exhibition. And as you enter the space, the illumination, the peacock, was there, which was really lovely and huge, and I think a real kind of focal point of the work. I love the way that it kind of reflects off the shiny floor. And you've got the film kind of central in this space, and then not visible in this image actually, and I should have included an image with it in, but there's another smaller screen just round the corner from that, which had all of the footage of the fairs, which isn't something I've talked about a lot today, but that was also another kind of quite key element of the project, of the history of Pat Collins. And there's lots of really informed and kind of expert local historians who've done lots of work on lots of these strands. And so, I did look at their books and things like the history of Pat Collins fairs and other aspects. That it kind of stood on the shoulders of lots of other people's work. And I think that's what's really nice about doing this kind of work. For me, that's what's really gratifying, is that you can pull on all these rich strands of local history, of people that are doing it for the love of it, really, and have really interesting conversations with people about these sorts of these slightly hidden histories, shall I say, that are very, lots of people know of them in the area, but perhaps it's less known, even just a few miles down the road. So I think that's what's really gratifying to me about working these sorts of ways, is kind of talking to people and finding out all these really interesting facts and kind of histories in families as well. So it's sort of like, oh yeah, I remember my parent or grandparent would do this, would kind of attend these sort of various celebrations, or was a carnival queen, for example, all those sorts of rich histories that were there. So this is just a couple more images of the exhibition, the peacock, and then these trestle tables with the images and the research there. And just to say, actually, before I play the film, there was, Hannah and I did some kind of archival research into the actual performance itself, and I think initially we didn't find much, but then found, and I can't remember if it was the Express and Star, I think it possibly was, but I might be wrong there, and I've got it, I found it in my folder. But you can see it's I don't know why it was always such a bad copy, this newspaper article, but this was from the performance, which, as I said, was in the town hall, and it seemed like it was a bit of a disaster. So I'm going to read you a little bit, which that you can just about make out in the image. It says, pageant opening was near failure. First night audience was unfortunate. The cast and producers of the Pageant of Walsall must have felt as disappointed as their audience in the first performance of the show, which was given in the town hall on Monday night. This was a near failure, largely on account of the poor acoustics of the hall and a defect in the amplification, which made it almost impossible for anyone in the audience to hear the narration linking the tableau. Without the explanation of each scene contained in these narrative passages, it was sometimes difficult to appreciate the significance of the individual tableau. The transition from one episode to another, often a matter of bridging several centuries, was frequently hard to realise. So I'm not sure the audience really knew what was going on fully in this performance. There was a technical difficulty, which was to a certain extent overcome after the first night. Even so, had the audience been able to see the narrators, or presumably they were off stage somewhere, the chapters of merely spoken history might have proved more interesting. So I've got a feeling we found this after we recreated some of the passages, but I find it interesting, kind of in the recreation, what the gap between kind of intention with the writing of a script and realization. There's always going to be a gap, because we live in an imperfect world and things happen, but I find that interesting in the way that when we performed it and made our own version, it's also an imperfect version, without costume, without the kind of some of the artifacts that might have been used here, and the images, which I think you can just about see on screen. Now, this is a really terrible copy. You know, the costumes look really quite opulent and quite interesting. So there must have been a budget there in terms of the kind of the production of it. And just to say, actually, on the writer of this work, I never found out much about him. So if anyone in the audience knows anything more than I do, actually, that would be really interesting to hear. But yeah, he wasn't someone that we managed to particularly uncover who he was. But he wrote this. I mean, he must have been, you know, very knowledgeable about these histories, and he wrote this huge script. There's just one last little anecdote within this that I thought was really nice, that I just wanted to share with you if I can find it. And just to say, actually, there was music involved. They had a choir, they had musicians. Some of the tableau required of, say, a set of string players. So, you know, it was significant. I think a lot of local people were involved in this, and, you know, I'm sure, you know, the previous talks talked about, you know, the Festival of Britain, you know, in a larger context, but, you know, this sort of bringing together of people, this opportunity for celebration. I think, you know, that this staging was really an opportunity to do that. In the little research that we managed to pull out about this kind of actuality of its performance, you can tell, like, what a big production it was, how many people were involved in it. Yeah, this bit I particularly liked. Lack of dressing room accommodation in the town hall compelled some members of the large cast to prepare for each performance in another building. In the picture on the right, which you can just see, it's the top image on the image on screen. Passers-by are shown watching with amazement as 5 bold barons dressed in 13th century costumes stride back to their dressing rooms after a rehearsal. They were taking part in the Lady Margaret Paynell episode. So, you know, it's kind of nice that there's like a kind of social history at play as well. So in that image, it might be tricky for you to see, but there's these kind of men dressed opulently walking past a pram and some children and a mum, I presume, a couple of women in the street looking amused at this kind of not everyday sight. And, you know, I think that's what was made it such an interesting thing to recreate, really. In the making of the work, we tried to kind of draw on lots of people's experiences, and this was obviously an episode in the 50s, you know, in the Festival of Britain, where lots of people came together. So I in some small way, in a very much smaller way, you know, in our 2015 version, we wanted to kind of draw on that, really, and bring it to life in a very, very different way. So that's my chat about the history of the project, the kind of strands of the project, and this script from the Festival of Britain. And so now I'm going to just jump out of these slides and jump into the film itself, and hopefully, fingers crossed, play it for you. So just give me a moment to do that.
Walsall shall become a great and fair city. So I say farewell to thee. I shall watch after
So men shall build for themselves mills of grinding corn. They shall have many cattle. They shall be taught to make their own ploughshares, and many other things as yet we know not of. Thy women too shall weave fine linen to make for themselves rich raiment. Thy people shall be fruitful and multiply, spreading as they do beyond the water, even to the forest of Cannock. And as the years pass, Walsall shall become a great and fair city. Though I say farewell to thee, I shall watch from afar, and as always, as now, wish thee well. Farewell to thee, son of walls.
farewell to the son of war.
Farewell to thee, Ethelfreda, Lady of Mercia.
Sorry, I'm just going to fast forward a little bit. This bit's the Margaret panels.
Full privilege perhaps accounted for its poverty.
The Manor of Walsall, the gift of the crown, was held first by one family, then by another.
Until, in the year 1280, we find the manorial rights held, uneasily, by the remarkable woman named Margaret LaRue. Let us take a peep into a rather troubled life.
As I thought, scoundrels, ruffians, assassins, you depended on my weakness as a woman, but you were wrong. The weakness you expected from me is my strength, and the sacrifice my husband made shall not be in vain. Bring in the sheriff and the men that I know full well are waiting. I will go to court with them to the court of assize, where, once again, I shall fight for freedom, for law and for order, for damnation to the law and force of brigandry, to the serfdom of the low-born, to the doctrine of that which I went I take. 'Tis you who caused the death of my husband, 'tis I who shall stand trial. Yet I do not fear, for I have frustrated your wicked plans. Mistake me not, gentlemen, I believe you have caused my husband to be done to death, and he could be easily avenged. The men it has pleased me to free from serfdom are filled with gratitude. I have but to call them, and you need not leave this place alive. Do not cringe, heroic gentlemen. I will not harm you, for that would serve no purpose, except to make you undeserving martyrs. No, you shall go free, at least until we meet again. You need not doubt. I shall come back to the Manor of Walsall, for I still have faith in men and in God. Go now, call the sheriff, for I am ready.
So the film is 40 minutes long, but I just wanted to play one more little clip, which is of the Bayard cults section.
On this day of the feast of the Guild of St. George, it shall be lawful for all persons to buy and sell and put to trade any goods, wares, or commodities by paying salages as is usual by ancient customs, but not frauding or deceiving in selling any unwholesome goods or provisions whatsoever, in paying a penalty of 20 shillings to be levied threat by the bailey.
I have seen your Bayard cults and their clubs, yet I am not afraid, though I do fear my bondsmen may flee at the sight of them. Therefore I go to London, there to lay my claim at the Star Chamber.
Then go, and tell the king we have eaten of his venison, and ere you come back we will eat again. Ring the bell of the Bayard, and sway to the park.
There we go. So I'll stop sharing now, as I'm aware of time. But hopefully that gives you a little sense of how it manifested and became the work through the layering of like the present day with the Festival of Britain tableau, and that happens throughout the film. So there are other instances where you've got Sister Dora and with the narrators and other elements as well, so histories of Walsall Illuminations, and as I mentioned, those other strands. But the script was really central. I think that was possibly the thing that kind of gives it the shape that it has as a film. So thanks very much for listening. And I think we might have questions. If there's anyone with any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Sian. It was just wonderful to see, and that overlay in there of the fairground with that sort of historical dialogue around the Bayard cults was wonderful. We've got a few questions coming in, and we've also had some comments. Alison Maxim, who's also doing some research into the Illuminations in Warsaw, I believe that's correct. She's just been posting some comments in the chat that she's managed to get hold of the original Pageant of Warsaw programme off eBay last week.
Fantastic.
So I've got a feeling yourself and Alison might need to have a chat about all things Pageant of Warsaw. But we've got a couple of questions that have just pinged up in the Q&A box. One of them's slightly controversial. I'll start with Margaret. Margaret asks, did the exhibition evoke any memories from local people who perhaps visited the Festival of Britain in London, and perhaps maybe to extend that, of people who experienced the Pageant of Warsaw as well, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's something that I think the people at the gallery, like the curators at the gallery, would almost answer better than I, in a way. But I know sort of from conversationally that there was quite an interesting and active response from local people. I don't know if the Pageant of Walsall aspect to the work stirred any, I'm sure it did, but I didn't get to hear that, as it were. But I heard other aspects, you know, that was passed on to me of, you know, particularly, I mean, I think the central aspect of the Walsall Illuminations, which is such a big memory for lots of people, not just Walsall people, but obviously definitely for people from Walsall, but from surrounding areas as well. It's a real draw, and there was an aspect of the film that looked at that. So yeah, that had a massive kind of obvious response. The Pageant of Walsall aspect, because there will be people around, I'm sure, I mean, it was 1951, who would remember it. It was less captured for me, but it's a really interesting question, and I think something that you know, that was something that I was really keen to see, actually, you know, the full circle of it, you know, like how people responded to the work when it got made. It, because so much of the work was talking to local people and that shaping the work.
You just wonder the little baby that was in that pushchair as those sort of characters in their 13th century costumes walk past, you know, where are they today, sort of thing. It's yeah, fascinating.
I like that aspect of like that happening in the street, you know, just round the corner from the town hall, and that happening today as well, you know, like people passing by, you know. I think there's sort of reverberations that they don't change, do they? So in a way, so I kind of, that was part of that, what was really interesting to me about like drawing the historical to the now.
So Alison's just posted in the chat that the pageant was just one of 40 plus events in Warsaw for the Festival of Britain programme. And so when you were going through that script, how did that link to the festival become apparent to you, and how did you sort of, and I guess as well, how promoted was it that the pageant was part of this sort of local hub of the Festival of Britain, I guess, using modern sort of language for it?
Yeah, I think it was a focus of it. I think it came towards, and Alison probably knows more than me, to be honest, about this, but I think it was towards the end of all this activity. But yeah, it was really active in terms of what was going on in Warsaw, as indeed elsewhere. And I think that's really important. And that became quite an important aspect of it. But I was, yeah, I would sort of hold my hands up fully. Like most of my interest was in the content of the script. That was where my energies were kind of placed, really, in kind of reenacting that and looking at kind of the details around it. So I less on the surrounding elements. But yeah, that's right. It was in October, for I think over a couple of days, wasn't it? It was it says it on the actual indication in the archive, but yeah, it was kind of occurred over time. There was repeat performances, so I think it got, you know, according to the paper, it was the Walsall Observer, sorry, not the Express and Star, in the Walsall Observer, it you know, possibly got better with repeat performances as well, but had that feeling, which I really like, of, you know, kind of a bit rough and ready, and and very homespun in a way, but really powerful, I think, in its kind of, in its rawness in that way, I think.
Which kind of leads us to Alison's question here, and this sort of contextualises it as well within the Black Country 1951. Do you think the Pageant of Walsall was a poor man's version of the Dudley pageant? So the Pageant of Dudley is something, in my other role as a researcher at the Black Country Living Museum, we do have this occasional fantasy that we will recreate one day the Pageant of Dudley. But from what I understand, that was in the grounds of Dudley Castle. They appointed a nationally renowned pageant master, Gwen Lally. So yeah, I mean, what do you reckon then? How do you reckon it would have fit or compared perhaps to something on that scale?
I think it was a homespun version, as you say. I think it was, you know, it was much more localized than, you know, employing like kind of national pageant expertise. But I think all power to it for that, in a way. I think that's what gives it its interest and strength, really, is it's very particular to, you know, the fact of it being Walsall and you know, the way that that's constructed. I mean, I'd like to know more than just this newspaper article, and there might be further information that we didn't unearth when we did this in 2015 that would be worth revisiting now, because sometimes, you know, there's like missing bits of research, and you think, oh, if, you know, with all the time in the world, I'd love to have found out more about that aspect. And I'm sort of also working from 6 years ago a little bit, but it's, you know, as it was coming back to me, I was like, oh yes, I remember now. And that idea of it being a bit unsuccessful, you know, I mean, the headline is near failure. So, and that's down to kind of, I think it's mostly the acoustics, because they couldn't hear what was going on. So it was very hard to follow. And that's obviously quite pivotal. But visually, though, from those just 2 or 3 images in the paper, it looked interesting. So, and the staging in the script as well is there is quite a lot of staging detail about, you know, kind of where things need to be, and there's, you know, there's a kind of construction as part of it, where sometimes people are placed, and then obviously the music as well, and some big scenes, the sort of crowd scenes and the like, which is in particular ones, which would be interesting to actually have been there. I'd love to have seen it, you know, what that actually looked like in its original form.
Sort of also wonder what the casting process would have been like, because I think Alison's put here that the writer was a local councillor, so was it, you know, a matter of who you knew, that, you know, depended whether you got cast in it or whether it was like just generally anyone in the community could get involved as well. So that sort of idea of and who got the best parts as well, was it a bit political in that respect? It's yeah,
exactly, because there are some big parts. One or two are mentioned in here, actually. The Margaret Paynell character, I think, is particularly mentioned from memory. I mean, it's so hard to read this because it's such a bad copy, but there are a few you know, kind of actors that are particularly pulled out by this journalist, the writer of this, as commendable. So yeah, so how they got the part, and if they were local thespians, or that's something that I don't know.
It was Vera Wheeler who got that part. Thank you, Alison.
There was Lady Paynell, Margaret Greaves as Ethelfreda, June Greaves as Jane Lane, Millicent Wesson, all the women, actually. Millicent Wesson as Sister Dora, and that's what I think was really powerful. Like the Margaret Paynell section, which is why I was keen to play that particular bit of the film, was really rousing. Like, you know, in the modern version that we made, which I don't know how alike in any sense it was to the original, but it was a really rousing speech. And I think that's really nice about it, is there's some nice roles for women in here. There is some sort of strong characters, Ethelfreda obviously, but there's this Margaret Paynell character, Sister Dora. So, you know, that's what's really quite, for me, particularly strong about it, is that element of quite meaty parts.
Wonderful, thank you. If there's any more questions, please pop them in the Q&A for Sian. I've just got one really about your sort of practice and the approach to this. When you were showing those wonderful images of the exhibition at Walsall Art Gallery, there was a sense that the research was as much a work of art as the video installations, etc. as well. And I guess really for you, how does that relationship work? You know, how do you think of the research? To see it displayed in the vitrines like that is really quite beautiful and quite a shift, I guess. And it's almost promoting the research to the same level as the artwork.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think it changes for me a little bit project to project. Because the research in my first project that I mentioned at the start, just to contextualize how I got here, really didn't have that role in that piece of work. It was installation, and it was video based, and it was several screens, but it didn't have that aspect to it. Although research was really key in there, but it was I suppose in that video, the research was within the images more of the video itself. So that was, you know, not to talk too much about that one, but it was a lot to do with kind of letters between a father and daughter, and and again, you know, this was within the Victorian period actually, so a little bit before some of this research, but hair was there and pressed flowers and things like that, and that's really important stuff to me. And actually being in the archive and seeing it in person, in the same way in this project, I think, you know, actually going and looking at the script itself, and it's very evocative. So that's why those objects and that stuff of the archive, that history, is really important. So in this project, I think, yeah, we kind of prioritized it, and that was, you know, that was talking, it was, you know, working with the curator was such a strength for this project for me. We're having another person, a couple of people, but mostly Hannah at the gallery, to kind of sound off and to really sort of steer it with me, and, you know, so being instrumental in that, and the way that it was formulated, I think, kind of prioritized the archival research in that way. As you say, you know, it's in those trestle tables under glass, and the script itself as well, because kind of it's sort of a little monumental, isn't it? Or kind of like it's precious, it's here, it's lit, it's all of those things. It's telling us that it's something that's important.
Yeah, definitely. I think that act of putting something behind glass instantly kind of elevates it, doesn't it, in some ways? So yeah, wonderful. And I quite like the idea of the writer of the Pageant script probably having no idea that one day that would be sat in an art gallery. It's quite wonderful.
Yeah, nice to think, isn't it, in a way, of the life of these things beyond their original intention as well, and the fact that they've survived as well is no mean feat sometimes. So yeah,
definitely. Right, so we've run a little bit over there, but massive thank you, Sian. It's been absolutely wonderful, and there's been some wonderful comments as well from you all at home as well, so thank you for your kind of input and your questions. And thanks again, Sian, and also massive thanks to ArtsFest at the University of Wolverhampton, the Black Country Living Museum, and the External Engagement Events team at the University of Wolverhampton for their support throughout this series. The Festival of Britain, I've got a feeling this might be a theme that we come back to at some point, as it sparks so many different conversations. And yeah, it's just been really kind of a thought-provoking few months looking at the Festival of Britain in the Black Country. So watch this space, and hopefully it's something that we can revisit. But yeah, thank you so much, Sian, and thank you all very much for tuning in, and have a wonderful rest of the evening. And yeah, hope to see you all at an event soon. Bye bye.
Thank you so much. Bye bye, everybody.